Hi, my name is Tracy Williams, and I'm responsible for the MFL provision across the ATLP, which is a multi-academy trust in the Midlands with 8 primary schools and 5 secondary schools. When my own children started in reception and they started to learn to read, I finally understood how much of an impact teaching French phonics could have in my MFL classroom. It was my light bulb moment. No wonder children can't pronounce the word doigt if they don't understand that O and I makes a wa sound in French, not an oi sound. So after a couple of less than successful attempts to introduce phonics all by myself, I came across Sue Cave's Physical French Phonics program. I started to trial it in my own classroom. At the time, I was core leader for MFL in one of the ATLP's secondary schools, but I wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about before I rolled it out to the staff in my team. My previous attempt at introducing phonics looked something like this. I'd show a picture and I'd show them the grapheme that went alongside with the picture, and we would chorus the sound. So I would say O, and the children would repeat O, and we would follow a similar process. So un and on, etc., etc. The lessons themselves seemed to go well. At the end of the lesson, the children were correctly able to produce the phoneme and link them to the respective grapheme. But very little of this learning seemed to carry over into the following lesson, and children frequently asked me why there was a hat or a sheep on the PowerPoint slides. Whilst the link between chapeau and the sound O was very clear to me, it seemed to be a cognitive step too far for the children to be able to make the necessary links. So, in the summer of 2018, I decided to trial Physical French Phonics in my Key Stage 3 classroom. My discovery of the French Physical Phonics programme also aligns with my developing understanding of cognitive science and the impact that dual coding can have on your long-term memory. So, what did I do to start with? Well, I started off by explaining that we were going to do something different in our lessons to help develop their French pronunciation. I asked them how they would say these sounds in French. I was told in and quoi and oi. I then told them that these graphemes make completely different sounds in French to the ones that they make in English, and unless I taught them the French phonemes, they were always going to find it hard to pronounce French words. You could see the light bulbs turning on behind their eyes. I went on to explain the approach: an image, a sound, and an action coupled with the grapheme. I told them it was really important for them to fully embrace the approach because for some people it would be the action that would help them to remember the sound, and for other people it might be the image. Some people might be able to link the grapheme and the phoneme together in their long-term memories immediately, and then we went into some chorusing. I would tell the children in my classroom that they needed to pretend to be a Spanish dancer. They needed to raise their arms above their head and click their castanets. I would do the action and make the sounds, and they'd repeat after me, loads and loads of chorusing. Then I'd say the sound and they would need to do the action, or I'd do the action and they would need to say the sound. We all know loads of chorusing games that you can use, which work really, really well to introduce the phonics in the first instance. And then I would say to them, the k sound is linked with the grapheme Q, U. Having said that, we'd then get the mini whiteboards out and I would make the sound and they would need to write down the graphemes on their mini whiteboards. The lessons went really well. I could stand at the front of the classroom and pretend to be the Spanish dancer, and the children would all chorus k, k, k back at me. The next step was to find a way to actually properly embed it into my teaching and into the schemes of learning within my department. So, how did we embed Physical French Phonics into our schemes of learning? Fast forward a year, and it was time to rewrite the Key Stage 3 schemes of learning once again. This time we were working collaboratively across the Multi-Academy Trust, and as a MATS MFL team, we were keen to properly embed phonics into the new scheme of learning to make it an integral part of our MFL curriculum intent. We started by mapping out the curriculum content. And then we wanted to embed the teaching of phonics alongside the plan's content. Rather than following a rigid phonetic order, we devised our own order for introducing each of the phonemes so that it was linked directly with the content within our scheme of learning. We systematically mapped out the introduction of the phonemes to ensure that we introduced as many as possible over the course of Year 7, and to also ensure that we had an opportunity to introduce multiple graphemes for each of the different phonemes. At certain points within the scheme of learning, we included a lesson where the phonemes and corresponding graphemes were introduced with the learning objective of how do I pronounce French words properly. These lessons gave the teacher the opportunity to spend time introducing new phonemes and giving the teacher sufficient time to practice linking them with the action and the image and the corresponding grapheme in the context of the language from the scheme of learning. So, for example, very early on in Year 7, using the context of numbers, we introduced the first 8 graphemes along with the silent consonant and the silent H rules. This is clearly set out in the scheme of learning, and there is time within the scheme of learning to make sure that this is done properly. We knew for this to be successful, we needed to incorporate it into all of our lessons, not just those that were identified on the scheme of learning as being lessons to develop pronunciation. So we highlighted letters on our sentence building grids and on our knowledge organisers. We also created sets of phonic retrieval, like do now or starter style activities to ensure that our students retrieve this new knowledge systematically at the start of lessons. We also use the images as prompts within our normal lessons to remind the students how to pronounce new words. This is an example of liaison using the Z sounds and the buzzing B image. We also used explicit questioning routines, asking students things like, which sound does IN make in French? That's right, it's the un sound. So on that basis, how would you pronounce this word? These things are all things that the teachers have now incorporated into their everyday questioning routines to ensure that students really have an opportunity to develop and embed their phonetic understanding. The final thing that we do within our schools is linked to error correction. The teacher and peers in the class also use the actions as part of their error correction strategy. So if students make a pronunciation mistake, the teacher or one of their friends can do the action for the sounds they have mispronounced, and the child can self-correct. So what about Key Stage 4? Well, I personally don't see any reason why you can't use the Physical French Phonics approach with your Key Stage 4 classes. I certainly use it with mine. Over the lockdown period, with Sue's permission, I used this approach in my Oak National Academy lessons. I think that having something that students can hang their learning on is really, really important for long-term retrieval. The images, the actions, and the corresponding link with the grapheme and the phoneme really, really help students to embed this understanding in their long-term memories, and it helps them to unlock the code in order to be able to pronounce French words correctly. There's no need necessarily in Key Stage 4, given how tight on time we are, to introduce all of the phonemes. You could choose the phonemes that students find the most difficult to pronounce and incorporate these systematically into your schemes of learning. The benefit of the error correction strategy is huge. It means you can intervene in a really non-threatening way and help students to develop their pronunciation. So, what impact have we seen since embedding French Physical Phonics into our schemes of learning? Well, we introduced French Physical Phonics in September 2019, so last year's Year 7. The Year 7 students really, really enjoyed their how to pronounce French words correctly lessons, and we saw immediate improvements in terms of their ability to recognise the grapheme and then to be able to identify the correct phoneme. Unfortunately, due to the school closures that happened in March because of COVID, we weren't able to properly assess the impact that the new curriculum has had in terms of developing students' French pronunciation. But what we do know is that our students in Year 8 have returned to school this September, and they still remember the phonemes and the corresponding graphemes, the image and the associated action. That knowledge has been retained in their long-term memories, and I think that is massively down to the dual-coded approach that that exists within the Physical French Phonics programme. We're excited about what the future holds. So if I were to give some words of wisdom from a head of department who's been there, this is what I would say. Firstly, developing French pronunciation is not something which happens overnight. To see a real impact, you need to commit to embedding the phonics approach into your scheme of learning and into all of your lessons. It needs to become second nature to the teachers delivering it. It needs to move beyond individual chorusing of the phonemes and identifying the corresponding grapheme to application of this knowledge with unfamiliar words. This requires CPD to upskill your teachers. Most of them will feel massively out of their depth if you ask them to teach French phonics without this initial training. The level of success you'll see will be completely related to the consistency of your approach. Something that will really support this is time in your faculty meetings to talk about what everyone's doing and to share best practice. We have really enjoyed our journey into French Physical Phonics. I hope you have as much fun as we do.